Hello and welcome back to yet another FIA manufacturers race, this time in the GR3 cars around the Nürburgring 24-hour track, which does of course include the Nordschleife. Now those of you following along at home will know that just recently, in fact only about 2 weeks ago, I did participate in an actual Nürburgring 24-hour race on iRacing. So you're probably thinking, you should know this track pretty well, and as it turns out I kind of do. I didn't have a lot of time to practice for this race, as per my usual excuse, but was pretty happy to find out. I jumped in the car and set off on my first flying lap, remembered every single corner, as I should do as well. I mean, I had just completed 40 laps of the track 2 weeks earlier. But I did remember every corner, every crest, and in fact I followed along with the same gear selections. Of course, it was in the GT3 car on iRacing. This is a GR3, but let's be honest, this Porsche 911 RSR is actually a GTE car. I'm not going to get into the specifics. Nonetheless, I was able to transfer my gear selections and took all of that. The lap went really well. It felt solid. It felt like I knew what I was doing. I had to, of course, get used to the feel of the car again. But I think it was an 8-minute 32 was my very first flyer around here, which I thought was decent. So I took off for my second flying lap and tidied things up a little bit. I had a better feeling for the car and the corners and how it was going to respond. So I pushed on a little bit more, actually managed to shave a full 10 seconds off on my second flying lap. Did an 8-minute 22. And to be honest, it felt really, really good. I don't think I made any mistakes. It was absolutely perfect. Every gear selection, nothing unpredictable happened. It was spot on. So I jumped out and checked what other times were doing, thinking with a little bit of confidence, I suppose, that I'd be looking pretty good. And the top time on my friend's leaderboard, can you believe, was an 8-minute and 3-second lap, which just blew my mind. Here I am thinking that my 8-minute 22 was absolutely perfect and going to be doing really good things for me, and I was so far off the pace. Now, to be fair, that was GTR Freak, who of course is one of the top racers in the Australian region. So I decided to jump out and watch his lap, and this is where, I mean, if you want to know what the differences are between iRacing and Gran Turismo Sport, the most perfect thing you can do is some laps in iRacing, get a feel for it, do a really tidy lap that you're proud of, then jump back in Gran Turismo and watch somebody else that is doing these FIA races or a daily race or anything where they're having to push the car to get the best time. And the difference is night and day. Of course, in iRacing, you have to drive very smooth, very predictably. The game, the car, and your times reward you. The smoother you can drive, the more accurate you are. You just really have to nurse the car. It's a very difficult track. There's high curbs, lots of undulations and bumps and dips, and it can upset the whole handling of the car. In fact, I had one fairly major crash in a high-speed section on my 24-hour race, simply by missing the apex by about a metre or so. It put me into a bump which kicked the back of the car up. Next thing you know, I'm bouncing off the walls. That's how fine it is and how careful you have to be around the Nordschleife on iRacing. Now, when I watched this recorded lap, I could not believe what I was seeing. He was absolutely ragging this car, slinging it into corners, just hoping that, just believing that after the car would do its weird little dance that it seems to do when the front goes and catches and the back goes and catches. I don't know, it's hard to explain. Bouncing over curbs, eating up the grass, just really throwing it around everywhere. And I'm not trying to say this in a negative way, but that's how you drive the car in Gran Turismo. So for me, this is probably one of the biggest differences. As I said before, if you want to know the best possible way to sum up the car physics and the tyre models in Gran Turismo versus something like iRacing, go and watch someone very good do a lap of iRacing and then do a lap of Gran Turismo Sport around the same track, and you will see it for yourself. So I got back out there, and I only really had about 2 or 3 laps, or enough time to do 2 or 3 laps before the start of the race. So I did the first one, and I must admit, actually I stacked it the first 2 times, but I just went out there and just threw everything. The kitchen sink at the lap, I ragged the car around and just drove like a real pig, like a real animal. And the times were good. I did bin it a couple of times, but on the third attempt at a flyer, I nailed straight away after this perfect lap, which was an 8.22, I dropped straight into an 8.19 flat. And that was with a couple of mistakes, and one fairly substantial mistake. where I sort of ran off and had to get out of the throttle and such. So I then joined the race. I had enough time for one more flying lap in practice, and I was actually 3.5 seconds up on that, looking pretty good for an 8-minute 16.5, which is still miles off the top times, but I was getting my head around it a little bit, and unfortunately I dropped it into the tear gut and just got it all wrong, smashed into the wall, and that was that. Nonetheless, what you are watching here is my actual qualifying lap, and can I just take a moment? I know there's been a lot of talk at the moment on YouTube. You've probably seen it from some of your other favourite YouTubers talking about the state of Gran Turismo and how they are running such high tyre wear, and it really came to a forefront here at the Nürburgring race, because the outlap, the parade lap, you just had to drive so slowly to protect those medium compound tyres. Even an average pace around your outlap was just going to destroy your tyres. So it was just a procession. It was an absolute joke. I'm not going to show you any footage of it. It took me nearly 12 minutes to get around the lap, and I was neither gaining on anybody or losing anybody. We were just sitting in a pack, and it was pretty embarrassing, actually. It's not the kind of thing I would imagine Polyphony Digital would like to see 20 people, driving around a track at snail's pace, crawling through the corners, because it's the only way to get one solid lap in qualifying. And in fact, after my qualifying lap, as you'll probably see, I may not show the end of it, but my tyres were about knackered. So they were pretty well done. That was the medium, so I did decide I was going to race it on hard compound tyres. I wanted to no-stop it, so I only had to do 2 laps, of course. It is only a 2-lap race. I had to do the 2 laps on the hard compound tyres. I figured I should hopefully be okay, but I am actually going to skip forward now to the start of the race. Yes, and 10th position is where I managed to put it at the end of qualifying, and look, to be honest with you, I'm pretty happy with that. Given the calibre of the people I'm racing against here in the top split, anything in the top half of the field is actually a pretty good effort for me, so I will take 10th. I was very briefly in 6th when I first crossed the line, but yeah, 4 more people knocked me off the perch by the end of qualifying. As we come down into turn 1 and 2, this is normally the place for chaos to happen and action all around, but as you can see, it was entirely gentlemanly. Everyone took it nice and easy into there. Kudos to everybody involved in that corner, because it was just clean, good clean racing. I think most people at this point have probably realised that whilst you can't win a race in turn 1, you certainly can lose it. So it was nice and clean, and in fact, you know, we're all still here as a pack. In general, I think this whole race was pretty nice and clean, for me at least. I think there was a bit of argy-bargy up the front, which I wasn't involved with, but I guess that's an advantage of being in the top split. I've complained about it a couple of times because I don't really do enough practice to be in the top split, but I always seem to get match made into the top split. But if there is a positive to take out of it, it's that the calibre of racing does tend to be a little bit higher. Maybe in the lower splits, turn 1 and 2 there, you could probably expect a bit more carnage than did happen. Now, I'm not going to show you too much of the first lap, primarily because not a great deal happened. I'll sort of watch the last half of the last lap, but that is a nice segue into the topic I thought I'd have a quick chat to you about while we do watch this, and that is whether or not the Nordschleife belongs on this FIA circuit, if it's really testing drivers the way it should. You see, this is a 2-lap race, so it's going to take us, 18, 19 minutes or something like that to complete the race. That's a sprint race. Any race that goes for less than 20 minutes is a sprint race. And look, sprint races are great. They tend to have a lot more action because it keeps the pack more bunched up. And it tests out drivers and their abilities by asking them to do the same sort of pace they were doing in practice when they were all by themselves, but this time around a pack. They have to defend against the guy behind them. They have to try and look for an overtaking opportunity against the guy in front. I mean, you guys know what sprint races are and why they work and how they test out drivers. The thing with the Nordschleife, it's a very, very long track. It's a very tight, technical, difficult track, and it's very narrow. There is almost no overtaking opportunities on this track whatsoever. Obviously, you've got the long straight at the end of the lap, but there's not a great deal of spots you can cleanly and predictably overtake a car. Now, you can see here that there is a penalty. I'm coming up to ART Noble who attracted a 5-second penalty. Not sure what for. I know there was a bit of action up front, which they chatted about after the race, but I do briefly gain 9th position. But those of you watching, you will see Lion Face there. He was behind me for a lot of that lap, and I didn't give way to him on the ring, but I also was sort of getting ready for an overtake. He didn't really take that opportunity until the straight, so I just let him through. Didn't try and argue the point too much, and in fact, when I got in his slipstream here, I actually just rolled off the throttle to make sure I didn't slingshot back past him or anything like that. Even coming into the Tiergarten up here, I just got right out of the throttle in case he did anything a little bit unpredictable or he braked a bit earlier than I thought. It's a risk when you first start following a new driver. You don't know how they drive, you don't know what their braking markers are. The Porsche is quite good on the brakes. I didn't know what the Ferrari was like, so it's just always a safer option. If someone does overtake you and you are quite close to them, maybe brake a bit earlier than you normally would, just to make sure you don't plough into the back of them, because even though they might be taking their normal braking marker and you might be making your normal braking marker, if they're different, you could end up slamming into them anyway. So that's what I did. I guess the goal from here really was just try and follow Lion Face around. He is obviously a lot faster than me at most tracks in most races, so I think he had a bit of a bad qualifying or something, which is what put him down the field. He's been slowly plugging his way through. But I thought if I can try and keep up to the back, you just never know what will happen. And it was some good, close, tight racing. But getting back to this track itself, as I lose control a bit there, getting back to the actual circuit, the way the Nordschleife tests people is not with sprint races and people just overtaking each other left and right. This tests drivers by testing out their memory and their mental resolve, I suppose. You have to concentrate so intensely. And when you stretch that out over a long period of time, it becomes very difficult. And you find yourself racing against the track more than the competitors that are on it. But that's not something that's going to happen in 2 laps. 2 laps is entirely too short. You need to have endurance races. This is an endurance track. It is not suitable or set up for short sprint races. It's not going to make any sort of action at all. And whilst maybe down the lower splits you get some discrepancy with, people falling off the track by themselves, and it is a bit of a test of, driver versus track in the lower splits. Up here, everyone's just sort of clean and smooth, and you qualify wherever your pace gets you. Obviously, that's how qualifying works. But as long as you're nice and clean on the track, you will just go at the pace that you qualified at, and very few overtaking opportunities. You tend to just sit there. I qualified in 10th. I am now halfway through the second lap, or not quite, but on my way around the second lap, and nothing has really changed. Even Lion Face, who I suspect has got more pace than 180 in front of him, he looked for a little sly overtake there, but there's no room. You can see how much I actually caught up to him there, so different strengths and weaknesses. RS 180 going a little bit slower there, forcing Lion Face to get a little bit skew-if, but I think this is a track that's designed to test people through endurance, mental endurance. And as we all know, Gran Turismo Sport, they don't do endurance races. It's just not set up for endurance races. So, I don't know. As fun as this is, and as much as I love the track, and I do love this track, and it is a test of skill because it's such a complex and technical track, I'm just not sure it really quite fits into this. Maybe if they made it even a 5-lap race, and that's not a true endurance, but even a 4 or a 5-lap race where you did have to pit and you could maybe make some tyres last longer than others. Let's wind the tyre wear back a little bit. Let's put a few extra laps. Imagine if this was a 40-minute race. All of a sudden, pit strategies come into it, concentration gets tested, and anyway, it's something to think about, but I just wasn't sure that such a short race was quite right. But it was about this point of the race, for the very first time, I actually kind of realised that my job to this point was nearly done. Like, when Lion Face went past me, I knew that I just had to try and hang on to the back of him. That was always my goal. As soon as he went past, I thought, don't necessarily worry too much about trying to overtake him if I'm able to, but just try and hang on to the back of him, which, to be honest, I didn't even really anticipate doing. But I guess a combination of him being stuck behind 180 and me having a relatively clean lap, I was able to stick close enough. And it was around about this point I remember thinking for the very first time, I actually may have a genuine crack here at getting a couple of spots before I finish. I mean, 10th spot was fairly good. I'm happy with that. This is obviously the top split, and it was going to be a decent haul of points, and all things considered, especially given how hard it is on this track to overtake anybody at all, I thought I might actually be able to pinch a few more spots here. So at the same time, this was about the moment I realised that I had dropped off the back a little bit too far, and coming into these final 2 turns wasn't perfect. I would have liked to have been right under his rear wing if I could. That wasn't to be the case, and as I come around the final corner, I didn't get the best traction either. So I'm about 6/10 back, but in fact, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, you know what, that's not so bad, because the worst thing you can do is catch up too soon, and you can see that's what Lionface has done to 180 there. He's pulled out, and I suspect he's actually rolled off the throttle a little bit, tucks back in behind as I try not to break that slipstream. I was only just close enough to grab it, hang on by my fingernails. He is now tucked in behind, and you can see he's lining up his overtake. I'm going to try and go with him if I can. But at this point, we're at the fat end of the straight, 282 kilometres an hour. I'm all over the back of it. Thought about the dive up the inside, but you cannot overtake anyone into the Tiergarten. So at this point, I'm a little bit back. I'm relying on 180 to make a mistake before the finish. He's all over the curbs, gets a little bit out sideways. I push to the outside, move it back to the inside, thinking about trying to get some slipstream. Is there anything I can do before the line? Unfortunately, not on this occasion. It was a very epic, very intense race, one I enjoyed thoroughly. Despite the lack of actual on-track action, there wasn't a huge amount of overtakes there, but I can tell you the build-up in my head towards the end of that race was very, very intense, and at the end I had a huge smile on my face. Probably one of the more enjoyable races I've done for a little while. Oh, what a close finish can do for your morale. But that is going to be the end of the video, so I do hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed racing it, and here's to hoping there's plenty more fun races in the future. If you are new to the channel, remember to hit subscribe and the bell icon so you actually get notified when I do go live or upload content such as this one, and remember to leave a like. It helps me out, it helps the channel out, but for now, thank you all very much for joining me, and I'll talk to you next time.